The Department of State has posted the December Visa Bulletin, and in this video, we're going to be comparing the December Visa Bulletin to the November Visa Bulletin to see where the changes happen, because there are changes to the final action dates and the dates for filing. If you are in a preference category, you need to pay attention to this video because it's going to tell you when you can actually start sending your information to the National Visa Center. I am U.S. Immigration Attorney Lilian Chukwurah, and I help my clients get green cards and citizenships for themselves and their families using the U.S. immigration law system. Before we look at the chart, I want to go ahead and go over what the preference categories are for those of you that do not know what these categories are, because once we get to the charts, it's only going to say like F1, F2A, F2B, and then you are like, what is going on? Let's talk about it. F1 is the unmarried sons and daughters of U.S. citizens. This means they are over the age of 21, but they are unmarried. That's F1. F2A is the spouses and children of permanent residents. In this category, children mean children under the age of 21 and unmarried. So they have to be unmarried and under the age of 21. F2B is for unmarried sons and daughters of permanent residents, meaning they are over the age of 21 but unmarried. F3 is the married sons and daughters of U.S. citizens, and F4 is the brothers and sisters of adult U.S. citizens, because the U.S. citizen has to be 21 to file for their brothers and sisters. It is important to note, if you did not know this, that permanent residents cannot file for their married children, their siblings, or their parents. Okay, it's really important to know that permanent residents cannot file for those. So that's why you don't see them in any of these categories. Now let's jump right into the Visa Bulletin. So as you can see on the screen, I have the November and the December Visa Bulletin pulled up so that we can compare the two. Remember, the Visa Bulletin is only for preference categories, meaning this does not apply to immediate relatives of U.S. citizens. And immediate relatives of U.S. citizens are spouses of U.S. citizens, children under the age of 21 and unmarried, and parents of U.S. citizens. Those are the immediate relatives. So those immediate relatives don't have to wait on the Visa Bulletin for their number to come up, right? They can just go ahead and file the process and move through it without ever looking at the Visa Bulletin. However, if you are the adult child of a U.S. citizen, married child of a U.S. citizen, spouse of a permanent resident, child of a permanent resident, you're going to be looking at the Visa Bulletin more. Now, let's jump right into it. As you can see, the November, hold on. All right, let's start with the final action date for the family-sponsored preference category. We're going to look at whether there has been a huge shift or if it's minor steps, right? The more shifts you have, the more people would be eligible to start and get their visas. So that's what this really is. So each preference category has a visa number, meaning they can only approve a certain number of visas a year for those categories. That's why it's called preference categories. So if that number is up, the U.S. embassies cannot give a visa. So that's why the preference category matters so much. So as you can see, for F1, there has not been much of a change for all the countries except for China, India, Mexico, and Philippines. So all areas is still November 8, 2016. Okay? For China, it is still November 8, 2016. India, still November 8, 2016. However, Mexico went from November 22nd, 2005 to, as you can see, on the December Visa Bulletin, it has jumped up to March 1st, 2006. So that's why you need to pay attention to the Visa Bulletin, especially if you are not in this category of all chargeability areas, right? If you're not in this category and you are one of these countries, do not just pay attention to this. Make sure you are looking at your specific country to make sure that you notice these minor shifts. So every other thing on the F1 for final action date stays the same, right? It stayed the same except for Mexico. So that's why you have to really pay attention when you're looking at the Visa Bulletin. For F2A, it is basically the same. Nothing changed. Okay, F2A, nothing changed. F2B, right? F2B, change is in Mexico. And this shift right here is why it's so important to look at the Visa Bulletin every single month. Because as you can see for the F2B, if someone had their priority date for May 1st, 2008, they would not have qualified to get their visa in November 2025. However, now in December 2025, they can be approved for their visa. So that's why looking at them on a month-to-month basis and making sure that you are looking at the right box makes such a difference, okay? Make sure you are looking at the right box. So if you're from the Philippines, do not look at the all chargeability. If you're from Mexico, India, and China mainland, do not look at the all chargeability areas. Make sure you are looking at those specific countries because, again, it is different for those 4 countries. Every other country will look at the all chargeability, but those 4 countries have to look at their specific one and pay attention, because if you did not pay attention, you may have missed that the Mexico change from December 15, 2007 to May 15, 2008. Okay, you may have missed that. Now, if you also were not paying attention, you may have missed that Philippines actually changed. It did not change by that much. It changed by like 7 days. However, it is still a change because someone that has their priority date as October 2nd, 2012 for the Philippines would not have been able to get a visa in November. However, in December, they would be able to get a visa. So that's why it really matters to pay attention to this. For F3, the only change that I see is right here for the Philippines. Again, it went from September 22nd, 2004 to November 1st, 2004. Again, it's a few days, but it makes a difference. Actually, no, it's not a few days. Right. This is a couple months here. That means people that file within those couple months would have the ability to now be approved for their visa. And then for the F4, we are looking at this together. It is what? Change here, right? So I hope you are catching on that you need to pay attention to your specific situation, okay? Not everything is going to apply to you. So for Philippines, March 22nd, 2006 was for November, but now we are in December, and December is July 15, 2006. Again, that's a few months jump. So that is a good thing. When those jumps happen, we are happy about it and we want to pay attention to it. Okay, so now let's look at the filing date. So the filing date is different from the final action date. The final action date is when the embassy or USCIS can actually approve the visa or the green card. The filing date is when the US embassy through the National Visa Center can start collecting your information, doing your DS-260, your affidavit of support, and getting you in line for an interview for when your priority date actually becomes current for the final action date. Also, the difference between the final action date and the filing date, for USCIS purposes, they choose which chart to use for when people can actually start filing their adjustment of status if they are physically in the US and invalid status. USCIS is using the filing date to determine when people can actually file their adjustment of status. Remember, the final action date is when it can be approved, while the filing date is when they can actually accept the application. So now let's look at if there are any changes for F1, F2A, F2B, F3, and F4 for the filing date, okay? Remember, different from the final action date. So for F1, we are looking basically the same. Nothing changed for F1, right? We're paying attention and looking at the numbers. For F2A, we see immediately that there is a change because it's going from October 22, 2005 to November 22, 2005. So anyone that filed that has a priority date before November 22, 2005 can now, with the National Visa Center, start their DS-260, affidavit of support, and then if they're physically in the US in valid status, they can then file their adjustment of status application. So that's what that does for you. For F2B, we are looking basically the same, right? Nothing changed for F1 and F2B. So that's really important to know. F2A had a 1 month jump. F3, we are looking the same. Yep. So F3, we are looking the same. Nothing has changed for F3. And then for F4, again, nothing changed. So as you can see from the date of filing chart, the only change happened for F2A. Everyone else stayed the same month over month, right? For November to December, every other category is the same for the date of filing except for F2A. Whereas for the final action, we saw multiple changes. They were minor changes, right? Don't get me wrong. They were minor changes. However, they were significant changes for people that are waiting for their visa to be approved. Remember, this chart, the final action date chart, determines when the visa can be approved. So as you're looking at your, category, your priority date and all of that, you want to make sure that you are not confusing the final action date with the date of filing, because they do two different things. And you want to make sure that once your date for filing comes up and the National Visa Center reaches out to you to start your visa application, that you are doing that process as quickly as possible, while also keeping in mind that you are not actually going to get your visa until that final action date becomes current for you. Okay, so that's why we look at both the final action date and the date of filing, so you know when to expect an email from the National Visa Center. And then you also, for the final action date, know around when you can expect your visa to be approved, or at least your visa interview to be scheduled. I truly hope you found this video helpful, especially if you are in a preference category and you're wondering when you can actually expect an email from the National Visa Center. I hope this video helps you with that. Now, if you are either in the process or would like help with this process, the visa applications, the I-130s, feel free to reach out to me. We can schedule a free strategy session where we talk about your situation, what you qualify for, and answer any questions you have. You can do that by going to my website, lilylegal.com, click on Contact Us, and you can pick a date and time that works best for you for us to talk about your situation.